We are out in Copala today, and I'm here with one of our newer agents, Amber Truax, who is dual licensed in Oregon and also here in Cabo San Lucas. And she's been interacting with clients and has a couple questions. I think today we're going to kind of dive in about raising a family here in the Cabo area, especially versus like the United States. I have my wife and my son here. My son's about to be 5, so he's in school, and Amber has a couple questions about raising a son here, or a kid here. So,
yeah.
How's it going, Amber?
Good. How are you?
Good, good.
Okay, so what was your biggest concern with raising a kid in Mexico?
Biggest concern with raising a kid in Mexico, to be honest, I think it was more of the unknowns. You know, when I first decided that we were going to be in Cabo and stay in Cabo, I had family that reached out and they were like, "Hey, Fletcher, like, let's be honest, you know, your son will have better opportunities if you raise him in the United States." And my response was, I had a really good childhood growing up in New Orleans, but my response was that I think he's going to have a better childhood than me because he's growing up in paradise. You got the beach here. He loves the water. So I think the biggest thing was the unknowns, and they were unknown because I had never done it before. But here I am. That decision was probably 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago, because he's going to be 5. And I can say with 100% certainty that it wasn't the wrong move. And I'm not going to say raising him in the U.S. was a wrong move, but I'm very happy that I didn't really cave into pressure from people telling me that my son and my family are going to have more opportunity if I raised him in the United States.
That's great. So how do you think the school system is here compared to the U.S.?
This is a good one. So I've done a couple videos on TikTok about this that have gone quite viral. I was shocked, to be honest, at how good the school system was here. And I say shocked because the price. So my son goes to a private school here, and I think if you go off of price, it's probably 1/5 of the cost of a private school in New Orleans that would be equivalent to where he would be going. So right off the base is cost. And I think that's a huge thing in the United States is the cost to like daycare and also just to send your kid to school, especially at like a younger age when it's not necessarily so specialized. I will say too that it seems to me like the teachers here are like really into it. Like when I drop him off, they're all excited. And I have friends that are teachers in the United States, and a lot of them, especially like during the pandemic, I would say kind of felt underappreciated, underpaid, and they weren't really invested into their profession. Here, I feel like the teachers are very invested. Another thing that I found that is very interesting is that, and most people would disagree, I'm talking up from kindergarten to grade 12, right? So not the university. I think the university system in the United States, while overpriced, is one of the better in the world, better systems in the world. But when you start talking about like STEM, you know, math, science, things like that, I would say that right now, I think he's getting a better education in those specific subjects, or will be getting a better education in those specific subjects as he gets older. And I've noticed this from interactions with other Mexicans that went to school, let's say until like maybe 5th grade, and then they got transferred to the United States, and they're like, man, we were like 2 grades ahead of all the other students in the U.S. So I have been pleasantly surprised by the quality of the education here. Once again, he's going to a private school, but the private schools here are a lot less expensive than the private schools in the United States.
That's really interesting. So another question I get a lot is about safety. I think people worry about their children being here because there's a lot of kidnappings in the U.S.
Yeah, so I mean, like, to be honest, it doesn't really bother me at all. It's not like I am afraid to take my son out in public, right? And I would say, to be honest, I'd be more concerned about him like running into the street and like lack of like traffic laws.
Yeah.
Like that's more of a concern for me, but I don't know anyone here that, here's the thing. A lot of people associate Cabo and Baja Sur with the rest of Mexico, but at the end of the day, Baja is really an island, so it's isolated. So they'll take events that might happen on border towns or in the mainland where there's really nothing going on, right? So I personally think this is a very safe destination. I mean, it's like you walk around Cabo and people are driving like Mercedes, Porsches. In other areas of Mexico, like you don't see people doing that because they're a target. So I don't really even think about that, but I do get asked that,
Yeah.
but it's not something that really is part of my life. If I'm worried about his safety, it's more like if I'm not watching him and he runs into the water at the beach and like the waves are big that day. That's more of something that I'm worried about than anything like that.
Okay. So what do you think the biggest misconception is of raising kids here?
Well, I personally if I told an American that I actually think my son's getting a better education here than he is in the United States, like they're immediately going to be like, hey, that's BS.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a very big misconception. I just don't think, and for example, with you, Amber, like I know I went to college and I don't think college really did that much for me. And I think it's becoming more acceptable to not go to college, especially if you know what's going on. So there was a stigma when I came out of high school that if you don't go to college, you don't have a future,
Yeah.
right? And I think now people are weighing $200,000 worth of debt. So I just think there's misconceptions where people still think the United States has the best system in the world. And I think for a certain percent that is true. Like if you're in the top 20% of your high school and you're going to go on and get specialized in medicine or be an attorney, I think the U.S. education system is probably one of the better ones in the world. You have a lot of people that study here, in the States, and they go back to their country wherever they specialize in, right? But I think just the big misconception is the fact that people still ask me, is Cabo safe, when I think we've had 22 homicides this year, and that's literally a month or 15 days in New Orleans sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's just a little ironic. So those are the misconceptions that people have. Just they associate the rest of the country, and then once again, I think the media glorifies any bad event, right?
Yeah.
So I think those are the bigger misconceptions.
So what are your thoughts on the healthcare here?
Okay. Well, first, not to keep going back to the States, but I think since I can remember, Americans have been talking about, fixing healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still talking about it, and I just think it's gotten worse. So I think the cost of healthcare is a lot more expensive in the States, and I know people have insurance and stuff, but a lot of people struggle with that. So with healthcare here, let's first start off with my son's birth. First of all, it was the hospital that he was born in was a month old. So it was way better. My sister had a son a year prior, and I remember being super cold in a hospital, and it was built in the 50s. So, and all the equipment was new here in Cabo. The doctors were really good. So I was very impressed with the doctors when my son was born. And my wife would say the same thing. For healthcare here, I think it kind of runs the gamut. I tell people this, that your general practitioner, so if you're just talking about going for checkups or little things, it's not, it's not rocket science, So I think those types of doctors are really good here. When you start getting into more specialized medicine, for example, if, I got cancer, or, there was something going on where it was heart surgery or something like that, or a brain tumor, I think I'd probably be flying to Houston.
Yeah.
That would be certain. But as far as general, for example, when me and Elisa first met, we're going on a hike, and we were coming down the hill, and she cut herself, and she had to get, I think it was 12 stitches. And so we just went to the local doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and it was out of pocket $45. And I asked my friend who's a doctor in New Orleans, I said, if I just walked into a clinic in New Orleans and we're like, hey, let me get like 8 to 12 stitches, he was like, oh, $2,000.
Yeah.
So I just did the math right there. That's a 20-time markup, you know. And once again, I'm not going to say you want the wrong person to do stitches, but there was no difference in the quality of that healthcare other than the price.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, in and out in less than an hour.
That's
You know, so
amazing.
when you start getting into things like that, you start seeing that the healthcare. I will say this. Profeco, which is like the Better Business Bureau, actually like shut down 2 of the hospitals here because they got caught charging gringos and foreigners like 3 times what they would charge a local. So I think you have to like do a little bit of research. But I was speaking with somebody yesterday at the open house that we were at, and his wife had something on her like lung, you know. So this is a pretty like invasive surgery. And he was like, I couldn't recommend this doctor. You know, they've been seeing him for a couple months now.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying great things. I know of a Canadian who got knee surgery done here. And he was talking about how the fact that he even was getting people coming, you know, to do the rehab in his home. And the prices were just a lot better than what he would have to do in Canada. I know they have free healthcare, but at the end of the day, most Canadians will tell you that's nowhere near as good as it sounds. You know, you're on waiting lists. And so anyway, I've been pleasantly surprised with doctors here too. It's just, I would make sure a lot of people need like an insurance policy, but I would also make sure that you're talking to locals that know which doctors to go to. And then just make sure that you don't get the gringo treatment on pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, if we're talking about something serious, then hey, let's maybe talk about a U.S. hospital, because I will say, doctors in the United States, they're not cheap, but if you have insurance in the States and have like a serious issue going on, that would be my choice for sure. And fortunately, myself or no one in my family has had to be in that situation before. But I think right now, if something like that serious happened, where it was something serious like brain or heart or like cancer, I might fly into Houston or New Orleans.